The legal devaluation of men's lives is a largely unacknowledged, appalling human rights abuse, and it's my subject on today's Flamingo File. I'm Janice Flamingo of the University of Ottawa. In October of 2017, just as the Me Too movement was revving up to near universal praise as a necessary corrective on behalf of female sexual assault and harassment victims, a 26-year-old British woman named Rebecca Palmer was found guilty of 4 counts of perverting the course of justice. In an unusual decision, unusual because it was just, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for repeated false allegations of rape against a then 20-year-old British soldier. Palmer had had an affair with the man, and after he broke it off, she had begun an attempt to ruin his life by telling police that he raped her. Her campaign of lies led to the man's being arrested more than once and held in jail on various occasions. The fact that this woman will serve time in prison is quite remarkable and well-deserved. But the Wiltshire police rep's statement to the press is amazing and all too familiar to those of us who follow these kinds of cases. Here's the police rep's predictable comment. Quote, Palmer became completely embroiled in her own web of lies, and her appalling behavior could really have a negative impact on other victims of rape or sexual assault who may choose not to report it to police for fear that they will not be believed. End quote. This is the classic feminist response in which the real victim of Rebecca Palmer's numerous false allegations is seen to be other women, even though no real women were harmed by Palmer. The man, whose character was publicly dragged through the mud for 2 years, who received multiple police visits, who sweated behind bars, who foresaw his whole life permanently ruined, who dreaded years of incarceration, who had to defend himself against the claims of a determined accuser in an era in which we are continually exhorted to believe accusing women. This man's years-long mental and emotional suffering is of less consequence to the police rep and to the journalist covering the story than the potential hesitation of a hypothetical victim or victims. Welcome to the upside-down world of feminist culture in which ideologues have been so successful in spreading their propaganda that the average man and woman on the street will still tell you that it's a man's world, and that women are discriminated against even when the case in question is about a male victim. This is a world in which men account for well over 90% of the prison population and in which women's crimes, including murder, are consistently treated with remarkable leniency. Being a man in our era means knowing that you can go to prison for the rest of your life on the uncorroborated molestation claims of a teenage girl, and even if your accuser recants her entire story, the criminal justice system may well keep you in prison, and there won't be a public outcry because we're a culture that's inclined to believe men are guilty. Take the terrifying case of a Colorado man named Charles Farrar, who was sentenced back in 2002 to 145 years in prison based solely on the testimony of his rebellious stepdaughter, Sasha, who claimed he had molested and sexually abused her for years from age 11 to 15. The girl alleged that Farrar had assaulted her hundreds of times and had filmed his abuse of her. The police never did find any film, barely interviewed the girl, and failed to interview many witnesses who could have contradicted her story. Yet, still, the prosecution went ahead and the jury convicted Farrar. Just a few months after that conviction, the then 18-year-old Sasha took back her allegation, saying she'd fabricated the whole thing because she wanted to live with her grandparents in Oklahoma. She even confessed that she'd told one of the prosecutors in the case that it was all a lie on the morning of the trial. But no matter. Multiple judges have upheld Farrar's conviction, and he remains in prison to this day awaiting an appeal for a crime he and his former accuser insist never happened. Yet feminists tell us with a straight face that in cases of sexual assault allegations, we should start by believing the alleged female victim. And of course, it doesn't work the other way round in cases where adolescent boys are raped by their female teacher. Even if the abuse continued for months or years, even if the evidence is rock solid, even if the teacher admits she did it, she will likely be given a slap on the wrist. Earlier this month, May of 2018, a 32-year-old California high school teacher named Samantha Chiotta pleaded guilty to 3 counts of unlawful intercourse with a minor boy. Details about her crime are vague, but it seems that the teacher victimized more than one of her grade 9 male students, giving them alcohol and sexually abusing them at her home, but still managed to work out a lenient plea deal involving 4 years probation. Not a day in jail. She will not register as a sex offender, and she may even be able to reapply to teach school when her probationary sentence is concluded. Though the victim's grandmother is furious, saying she complained to the school about the ongoing abuse and nothing was done about it by the female school principal, Chiotta herself seems to think that she has been the victim in the case. In the statement accompanying her plea deal, she did not apologize and did not take responsibility for her crime, but spoke instead of the, quote, long journey that she had ahead of her, saying that although she had not had a chance to tell her side of the story, she would, quote, take what has happened and use the experiences and lessons learned to give back to the community, end quote. In a culture overwhelmingly inclined to see women as innocent, even convicted female sex offenders are allowed to represent themselves as noble victims. Our society has so much sympathy for women, in fact, that it even extends to female murderers. If a woman beats her boyfriend to death in a horrific planned murder, she will probably be able to claim some sort of mental distress as a way of avoiding conviction, likely citing fear of the man to justify her violence. And if she is found not guilty, the case will attract next to no attention because our society doesn't care about men who are beaten to death by women. We figure they must have done something to deserve it. Earlier this year, January of 2018, 32-year-old Ann Norris was found not criminally responsible for the murder of Marcel Reardon in St. John's, Newfoundland. Now, a verdict of not criminally responsible is said to apply in cases where the defendant is unable to appreciate the consequences of their actions, or unable to know right from wrong, or not in control of their behavior. Ann Norris was sufficiently in control of her behavior to purchase, the day previous to the murder, the hammer that she planned to use to bludgeon Marcel, hitting him so many times in the head that the coroner couldn't tell how many blows there were. And she knew enough about the wrongness of her action to dispose of his body outside her apartment and to throw the hammer into St. John's Harbor in order to hide the evidence. But jurors were responsive to claims that Norris suffers from bipolar disorder, and that was enough to get her off. Even the prosecutor in the case expressed sympathy for Norris, saying at the conclusion of the trial that, quote, these are difficult issues with no easy answers, end quote. A man is dead, but that's just a detail in the woman's story of psychological difficulty. No space in the report of the trial was given to personalizing the dead man or to representing the grief and loss of his family and friends. In the reports of all these cases, and so many more, there is a consistent diminishment of the humanity of the men involved and a corresponding enhancement of the humanity of the women, such that we are encouraged to imagine the feelings of female perpetrators while we are discouraged from imagining the feelings of the male victims. Whether they are falsely accused, sexually abused, jailed, or dead, the personhood of the men involved is airbrushed out of the picture so that it's difficult to identify with them at all. Being male in a feminist culture means knowing that your life is worth less than a woman's life. That's why I published Sons of Feminism, Men Have Their Say, a book that gives voice to men's experiences, telling what it feels like to be belittled, disliked, dismissed, blamed, falsely accused, and discriminated against under law, all while being expected to apologize for male privilege. The book is dedicated to all the innocent men who have suffered in our gynocentric and feminist society.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. If even half of our subscribers gave us $1 per month, we'd be well on our way to creating more and better content. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Studio Brûlé.